Jai Ma Seekers. Welcome to the exploration of Bhaja Govindam. The last time we left off, we were exploring verse 12, which is a significant verse. And in the process, we were also looking at debunking this idea that without the fulfillment of the desires that are cropping up in the mind, we cannot find security, happiness, fulfillment. We are debunking the idea that every desire that arises in our mind, no matter how valid it is urgent for fulfillment, and that somehow we must strive to make it happen. It's all right to have desires. We have early on discussed the difference between needs and wants. And while some needs are valid and they arise in the natural course and are fulfilled in the natural course, a person who is clouded with wants, small or big, they are usually many, they come around in clusters and they stay forever. They are like guests nobody invited, they don't leave, and they make our life miserable. We do not want that. And as a result, we are using verse 12 to go through an experiential knowledge-enabled journey so that as I teach or speak and as you listen, the ultimate teacher here is the Shastra, the scripture, the Vedic source, in this case, Shankaracharya's expression and writing, and we become steadfast in the truth and in our journey towards liberation. Dinyaminya sayam prataha shishiravasanto puna punahayata kalaha kririti gachatayayuhu tadapi na munchati ashavayu. Let me chant it again. Verse 12. Dinayaminya sayam prataha shishiravasanto punahayataha kalaha kridati gachatayayuhu tadapi na munchati ashavayu. Daylight and darkness, dusk and dawn, winter and springtime are coming and going. Time is playing with us, and even as it plays with us, life is ebbing away, and yet we notice that the storm of desires is not abating. The storm of desires is not abating. We are looking at this storm of desire. Asha Vayu. Vayu means wind, but in this case, it is not used from an Ayurvedic dosha perspective. The word Vayu is being used in its original sense as a wind, but it is not an ordinary wind. It's not a wind that you can contain because nobody can really contain wind and the speed with which it blows and the direction in which it blows and takes us along with it. So it is really being compared to a wind that is driving our mind hither and thither in the search for fulfillment, and we are, as a result, coming across with perhaps crumbs in our hand, perhaps not even that, but we're definitely feeling unfulfilled, definitely. Ushna Jala, warm water, the answer for everything. In this session, which is part B of the exploration of verse 12, we are looking, of course, at the fact that some desires are valid, they are necessary to pursue. What are those? But specifically, how can we even discern between pure and impure desires? Can we? Or will our ego justify our every want as a necessary need, legitimate need? Because it is our wants for a so-called better life that keep us dissatisfied with our present moment. We can't breathe, we can't stop and rest and smell the flowers and appreciate what has already come to us in a natural way. In fact, given to us. We're not able to explore that. So, what we need to then have or cultivate first is the pure mind. And a pure mind is that which is relatively free of desires. And how is it free of desires? Through the cultivation of knowledge in satsang, so that we realize that constantly fueling the desires in mind is not necessarily the way to go. Being overly restless, overly ambitious, overly full of angst may get you some material accolades and a few crumbs more than others. But really, what comes to you is what has been predetermined by Ishvara's order. And not a day before, and not a morsel more do we really get. And what is meant to come to us shall come to us. If it is abundance, if it is love, if it is respect, it shall come to us, and you cannot stop it either. So instead of getting so twisted up in our life, in our limbs, in our breath, with panting hearts and lolling tongues, should we be grasping after what our mind has conceived to be the next object that will give us pleasure, or should we stop and become restful in the divine bhakti, love, and jnanam, knowledge of Ishvara, that higher satta, that higher power, and become curious to see what's coming and what's going, and why it perfectly is suitable for our life. So there is an Upanishad, the Amrita Bindu Upanishad, and I shall be quoting 3 verses from it. Mano hi dividham proktam, shuddham cha shuddhameva cha, ashuddham kama sankalpam, shuddham kama vivarjitam. In this verse 1 of the Upanishad is saying that the mind is spoken of as 2 kinds. Shuddham, pure, and ashuddham. Shuddha means pure. So shuddham, pure, and ashuddham, impure. What is that impure mind? That ashuddham kama ashuddham kama sankalam. That impure mind is possessed of desires. And shuddham kama vivarjitam. The shuddha mind or the pure mind is devoid of desires. And again, please let me explain. We are not talking about the desire to eat food, because now your stomach gives you an urgency that it must eat, or to clothe yourself to stay warm or cool in appropriate season based on appropriate life situations. You will be wearing a piece of clothing which is of this price or that price. It's a normal course of things based on the family in which you were born and the ordinary circumstances unfolded for you. You would not be wearing a $20 sweater and striving for a $200 sweater, because that then is a want. So it is free of those desires. Ordinary needs arise and they are fulfilled in the ordinary course, and it feels like the universe is helping you meet it. But it is those desires which you're unable to meet ease with ease, and you're always striving, thinking, stressing, and wondering when, and praying, and spending all your bhakti time also with just that sakama bhakti of may this happen and may that happen. Then we are not living intelligently, and we do not have really our intelligence intact in our mind, because it has been sullied, it has become impure with these desires. Just like if you play with fire, there is no way that fire will not consume you. If you jump into a body of water, there is no way that you will not get wet. If you do not investigate the relationship of desires, which are everywhere, you will become desireful, and as a result, your mind shall become impure, ashuddha. And when the mind becomes restless, it rises and falls with the possibility of desire fulfillment, or the disappointment when the desire is not fulfilled or deemed that it shall be hard to fulfill. Anything these desires touch, and as a result, any desires that the mind groups around with, make it restless and make it rise and drop with great pain in the valleys of sorrow. So, what does that unfulfilled desire then do? I have been going through those verses with you. If you're joining me new, you must go back and review, because it leads you through a chain of emotions. One of them, the beginning one, is anger. We feel frustrated, resentful, irritated, as to why our desire was not fulfilled. And unfortunately, we have New Age philosophies, especially in the Western world, which tell us that you deserve for all your desires to be fulfilled, because the universe is a milk cow, and all you have to do is figure out its udder and yank, and there you go. There your desire will be fulfilled. And it goes against the observation of millions of years. And the Vedic Rishi said, no, we're not even here. These desires are here to tempt us, and to, not like a devil, but they are here to tempt us. And we have to discern between which desire is worthy of pursuit and which one is not. But the problem is that the influx of desires makes imperfect our mind, and the very equipment with which we are meant to discern becomes tainted, and we become tainted first with anger, and that anger does not let us come back to a restful place. We become more greedy. I want it, I deserve it. Now there is an intensity to it. There is jealousy from others who seemingly have their desires fulfilled. There is a whole chain of negative emotions that pull us deeper and deeper into moha, or delusion. That is why a desire-filled mind is a burden that we are carrying. And I invite you right now to just imagine your mind as a pure temple of Ishvara, of the higher power, the higher self, and not this morbid, dark stronghold of every wandering desire going around in society. Why do desires arise? They arise due to ignorance, avidya, lack of knowledge, this basic wrong conviction that my happiness lies one more desire fulfillment away. Just one more. Speaking as a human being, I have an aging pet who I care for deeply. A desire that's roaming around that needs to be looked at and set aside is, wouldn't it be nice if he lived forever? Galaxies don't live. So you look at it and go, perhaps it is exactly this lifetime that the embodied soul needs for its journey, and it was my privilege. It is my privilege to take care of this animal, this soul in an animal body, this divine being in an animal body, exactly for the moments and nanoseconds calculated to be in this body and not a day more. And yes, it will be not habitual to see this tiny furry bundle in my house all the time, but that is something I will come out of with the help of knowledge, and perhaps I would not go down that dark hole, especially when I understand that there is no birth and no death, and this is a continuous emergence and disappearance that's going on. And I have to look at it. That is what Bhaja Govindam is asking me to do, for example. So here was an example. A pure mind, then, when you're no longer just clutched with the worry of losing someone you love, that's an example I've given you. I'm not caught up in that sorrow. I'm just making up that example for you. But and because my mind is not caught up in clutching to the body of the Supreme Being as my dog, then you can go into a state of inner peace, purity, first of all, inner peace, restfulness. And there you can cultivate bhakti, devotion. You can cultivate service. What is happening right now when I'm teaching Bhaj Govindam? How does a being show up for not one day, 2 day, days, weeks, months, years, decades? In service. How? Because one realizes that one is not serving another, one is serving the same self in other bodies. One can then practice charity. Charity does not, it's not something you squeeze out of your wallet. Charity is a state of heart, it's a state of your being. You can quietly look at the yearning for Ishvara, for the divine truth, and then you can find that divine truth making itself more evident from within you. Like there is another presence that you could not discover until your mind was impure and full of desires, vasanas, trishnas, ichha. We talked about it, those words in the previous session. And whatever be the name, the desires stink up the mind and they make us restless and they make us lose connection with a dharmic way of life, and they definitely prevent us from a deep, ongoing connection with the divine. Yeah, we can have an occasional connection here and there, but not an ongoing, complete, full-on connection. Hence, we have the two types of minds that were expounded by Amrita Bindu Upanishad. And now let's look at the second verse. Mana eva manushyanam karanam bandhamokshayoho bandhaye vishayasaktam muktam ya nirvishaya sritam. So what is the Upanishad sayings? That since there are two extremes of the mind, a pure mind and an impure mind, and these minds are not what we are born with. We are all born with a pure mind, but these pure and impure states are the result of mental conditioning It is based upon the types of thoughts we think, the types of teachers we follow, the types of books we read, the types of voices that we have been subjected to all our life. Hence, these minds are responsible for either the state of bondage, bandhaya, bandha, bondage in samsara, bondage of the ego, bondage of those desires, being a slave to our own desires, or it leads to a state of liberation from samsara, from our ego, and not following its knee-jerk wants, and its and not agreeing to the ego that I am miserable because my desires are not fulfilled, because we become present and grateful for what we have, including this air to breathe and the sunshine and the rays of the sun coming to us unasked, and this intelligent body that we've been given to experiment and rediscover ourselves, as if an aspect of Ishvara is just rediscovering its Ishvarahood. So bondage of samsara, as a result, suffering, misery, unhappiness, and liberation, a sense of freedom, a sense of uh, inner bliss and peace and ease. These are end results of two diametrically opposite states of your own mind. The state of bondage is the end result of a mind that is attached to objects of pleasure, living or non-living, and it is constantly scheming, thinking, planning for it. And as a result, it has become impure, leading you further and further into the pit of samsara, into sorrowful worldly existence, from which there appears to be no chance of retrieval. Sometimes one may even encounter the teachings and the teacher and the tradition, but one may be so much in bondage of the so-called life and profession and relationships. And instead of being there for the person, they completely imprison the person, preventing them from showing up even for that teaching, which may have a modicum of a chance to set them free. So that cosmic opportunity shows up, stays for a bit, and then disappears because we were too much in bondage of what we thought was necessary to pursue at any cost because of that impure state of mind. But fortunately, what's the good news here? That this same mind can become a tool for liberation. Liberation from what? From this suffering, from this compulsiveness to suffer, and take us through a desireless mind to a state of our true being, which is one with Ishvara, one with Govinda, one with that ultimate light. And the only escape route from samsara is this pure mind. And that's why I'm going to share with you a story that Baba has shared with me, my guru, and I'll share it again with you. And probably versions of it are out there because it's from the same tradition. But my version says that a person was lost in the forest, and the forest here represents samsara. And no matter which way they went and what they tried, they had no exit. And they were getting more and more miserable. And to survive in that forest was not easy. Either hunt or be hunted down. It was not easy. Every moment was dangerous. And this person was tired and restless, and ultimately they came across a person who was sitting really, looking really radiant, meditating with their eyes closed. So this person went to them and sat with them and just enjoyed their peace. And after a while, they realized that they become peaceful, and then the person meditating next to them has opened their eyes, but they're still peaceful. And they're not trying to figure out anything. Neither their survival in the forest, neither their escape from the forest, nothing. They're doing nothing. They're trying to be neither good nor bad, nor justifying it, nor sitting and looking at the past and talking about how they had a difficult entry into the forest, how they were lost. They were neither talking about the past, nor they were talking about the present. They were just being really blissful. What happened here? How did you find this bliss? And the person says, well, you see, like you, I was also looking outside me for some relief until, and this is the original teacher who says, until I realized that the escape route is within me. So instead of trying so much out there, I started separating and closing my eyes and just sitting down and waiting for that to show up within me. Until and unless we are glued to our desire fulfillment, we ever cannot take a moment and we cannot ultimately move in towards the light that is waiting for us inside. The third verse, yato nirvishaya sasya manaso muktirishyate ato nirvishayam nityam mana karyam mumukshunam. So they are describing that mind which free from desire of sense objects, things that we see. We think that within these seen and unseen things we will get fulfilled. So it's a seeing by the senses, which is physical seeing, and seeing by the mind, which is mental seeing. One day this will happen, one day that will happen, all that. Yato nirvishaya, vishaya means object, yato nirvishaya sasya. When we become free from these desires, then manasa mukti ishyate. The mind becomes liberated. Atah nirvishayam nityam. Therefore, try to be ever free from the clutches, the associations, the hoarding, the touching, the imagining, the aspiring of these sense objects. These are all objects. They're all objects. The people around you are objects. The situations around you are objects. The things around you are objects. Try to have a free mind of them. Manaha karyam mumukshana. I've just rechanged the Sanskrit to explain that the fourth line is saying, so a mind should be well trained to do that. So why should the mind be trained? Why should it be restrained? Why should it not hop, skip, and jump along on the so-called societally validated desires that you must, and that makes sense, and after all, you are a parent, and after all, you are this and that. Yeah. Peaceful. Draw it in. It has to be trained. Who is training it? You. You are training your own equipment to not run here and there and not just simply dance on societal scripts handed down to your soul from when you started growing up. Indeed, because it is the karanam of bandha and moksha, bondage and liberation. You want to train it to become more and more pure, to be more and more disassociated from sense objects. If you are um, if you're walking through a mall and you see sale and discount and 80% and um, the first 100 people who walk into the store get something for free. Can you walk through that mall without being yanked here and there and buy that red sweater that you didn't need and the black scarf that you you know, really train that mind, train that mind so that it is not running wild like wild horses and this and that, but it is taking the chariot of your soul towards spiritual evolution, towards Govinda. Bhaja Govindam, Bhaja Govindam. Govindam Bhaja Murmate, because that ancient older body that contained a seeker soul probably got distracted by, oh, I think I'm just going to go memorize all those grammar rules because Sanskrit is a great language. It will bring me prestige to know it. I will be able to, perfect certain rules, a certain way of speaking at that ripe old age, which means time is passing. It's critical because we say ripe old age, but how do we know how much age we have left? And so, do we really have the time for distractions? Or do we want to show up to learn, which is the opportunity of satsang, to contemplate, which is the opportunity for mananam, and then to become that, to have to possess a pure mind, to actually experience the gifts of a pure mind and the oneness that one can experience with Govinda in that pure mind. Should that be where we are heading? So one needs a car if one lives in today's world, perhaps for their transportation. One needs a house. It may be a mansion or it may be a studio apartment. Living in America, one needs food. It may be from the finest ingredients of the world, or it may be just farm-based, organic, and simple ingredients grown from your own backyard. These are some basic needs, but we go into connuption fits. We become knotted up and so alienated from our true being, and we become such material dense creatures in providing for ourselves. All other animals and birds and all species remain in a natural state, while we become so unnaturalized in the process. So what are needs then? And I would invite you to check out my book Sovereign Self and check out the teachings on Swadharma. And Swadharma these are clues on what our basic propensities are and to meet them. But even if one of our propensities is to make wealth, which is a propensity, so you go out there and you have a business and you're running a trade or a profession, but are you pursuing Swadharma with a crazy mindset of more, more, more? Or are you generating wealth from a pure mind, from a place of, this naturally flows through me, but now it's time for me to meditate. Now it's time for me to rest. Now it's time for me to be in my backyard, smelling the flowers and tending to my vegetables. So Swadharma is not a blanket excuse for leading a scripted, conditioned life, but Swadharma is a way to discover your talent, Ishvara provided talent, and your attribute to give back. Because if you create wealth for yourself alone, you have not fulfilled Swadharma. It's only when you become a creator of sustainable, socially sustainable wealth for the community is when you've completed your Swadharma. And ultimately, all these Swadharmas have to lead you to contentment, santosha. Because if the mind remains restless at night and then in the afternoon and then in the board meeting and then in the corporate setting and then in the work setting. And if it's always restless, 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 age shall pass. And this is exactly what verse 12 is telling us, that time shall pass and day will turn into night, night will turn into the next day, seasons will change. And with that, the storms of desire shall not abate, and we shall be forever banished from that truth that is shining in our hidayam, in our own true heart, in our true being, and we will be far, far, far from it. And the time to wake up happens while we are pursuing our basic needs. And nobody's story can make this better exemplified than the story of a woman called Pingala. And I will tell you her story, and that would be something that we conclude this session with. And before I go into Pingala's story, I want to just take a moment to be grateful to the Vedas. If you've ever doubted about the Vedic wisdom and its progressive roots and capacities to make you a truly expansive being, you may not come across another spiritual tradition in which and most traditions point out to their apostles and their angels and then their guides and their devis and devatas and whoever is esteemed to look up to as the mahagurus. These are the gurus of not just a lineage, but the gurus of humanity. And you won't come across, or you may not come across anytime soon, another tradition which points to Pingala as a Mahaguru, as a teacher of humanity, not only because Pingala was a woman who lived many thousand years ago in the city of Videha in India, but because she was a prostitute. And this prostitute recognizes something, and her recognition becomes a teaching for all of us. And so she is mentioned in one of the holiest of the Hindu texts, the Bhagavad Purana, in deep way, in a deeply regardful way. What does she learn? So what she learns is that fueling desires, there's a problem with desires, that quenching them never fulfills them. Never feel, oh, I'll just buy this one extra thing, or I'll just go for that next job and I'll feel better, or I just need that one promotion and I'll have the respect I want and fulfillment I want, or I just want that one bestseller, or I want that one. Just the stream never dries up. This is something you have to understand. Desires do not go away by quenching them. They are like thirst, and you quench them. Physical thirst can be quenched, but mental thirst cannot be quenched. They only go away by understanding them, seeing through them, and not giving them importance. Please write this down. Just laughing at them to say, oh, how Maya, you have come to distract me from my Govinda truth, from my Govinda pursuit, from my pursuit of my higher self, from my spiritual evolution, from my true peace, from my true happiness which lies within me. You're just showing me some momentary things, and millions and billions of generations of humans have come and gone and tried to quench their thirst of the material nature and died and passed away, and more were born yet more greedy. And the desires just never ended. So here is Pingala's story. And before I give you Pingala's story, I also want to tell you the Vedic in attitude towards sexuality. There is no judgment of sexuality as such. As long as that sexuality is embedded within Dharma, within the pure context. And that is why Krishna, who is Ishvara incarnate in the Bhagavad Gita in chapter 7, verse 11 says, Dhyayato Vishaya Pumsaha Sangasteshu Pujayate Sangat Sanjayate Kamaha Kamat Krodho Bhijayate. So in this verse, Krishna says that when people are, when people have pure strength, the strength from a pure mind, then this could be virile strength, sexual strength, the strength to complete things and take up projects, then I am that strength within them, which is devoid of desires and excessive ambition, excessive passion. I am that pure strength, which comes for to fulfill the pure desires. And then, interestingly, in the second line, Sangat Sanjayate Kamaha, Krishna says, and I am. So I am. Govinda is saying, Ishvara, that it's not a person, it's a principle, is saying, I am the sexual activity which does not conflict with dharma. I am that. So when one is having an orgasm or a sexual encounter, which is in state of well-being for them and for society, then who is a witness, who is present in that sexual activity? It is that same higher principle. So this is not a condemnation of sexual act itself. Sex is not a sin. It is the context. And is there a sleepwalking conditioned mind that is approaching sex, or a pure mind that is enjoying the bliss of sex, which itself is divine, according to these beautiful teachings? And I have many, many more to tell you about the healthy attitude towards sex. But now we come to Pingala's story, Pingala, Pingala's story. This is in the Srimad Bhagavad, and it is this woman is, a prostitute, does not have much going for her. And so she stands every evening by the door, and the only thing she has for working for her is her body. And she thinks that, this is my body and I'm going to use it to feed myself. Food. Probably that's how it began. But gradually her mind got into it. And now she feels lonely without the company of someone with her to remind her of her beauty, her youth, her importance, and to convince or to satisfy her desiring mind, her deprived mind, her lonely mind. In those few moments of companionship where she feels wanted, important, dominant, seen, needed, that she is loved. Her hankering for love, her hankering for comfort, her hankering for pleasure has all got woven into her prostitution bid. And she's a sorry figure, really alluring and attractive externally, but a deep, dark hole of needs and desires internally. And there is this one specific evening, thousands of years ago, when she's standing at the door of this ancient city in ancient India, and looking at every man with a hidden desire that perhaps this man will turn and look at me. Perhaps this man will come in. And then her mind goes, perhaps this man will offer me money. Perhaps this man will offer me not just money that I ask, but gifts, because they'll be so allured by me. Perhaps this man will even fall in love with me. Perhaps this man will marry me. Perhaps. And a deep, dark question I have is, are we all prostitutes selling our goods? It's just, please don't take it otherwise, but it's like, are we all standing in the marketplace of life? So here we have an actual prostitute. And then evening turns into night, and night turns into late night. And that particular day, she does not seem to have any luck. And sometimes when we don't get our luck, when we don't get what we want, it is Ishvara's will that we don't get what we want. She did not get her dose of her highs and her hopes fulfilled. And she becomes dejected. And sometimes we get there. And in that dejection, some kind of vairagyam or a distancing emerges, a dispassion, a detachment emerges on its own. And this is the key work of suffering. It has to make us detached. And so in that particular day, probably she'd had many, many years and days of dejection. And that particular day, detachment arises. Aho mimoha vitatim pashyata vijitatmanaha ya kanta dasata kamam kamaye yena balisha. And Mingala Vacha, she speaks up. She says, oh, just see how greatly delusional I am. Moha, that we are talking about in Bhaja Govindam. And she says, because I cannot control my own mind leaping in all its desires. I'm like a fool. She calls herself a fool. I am desiring a lusty fulfillment. From who? She says, from insignificant men. Why are they insignificant? Because they're just coming and going. They're insignificant. They are unable to fulfill her. These are all our relationships in that ultimate sense are insignificant. Kate kanta kato putraha. We have already gone through the verse. Who is your wife and who is your child? So she says, what am I doing? Santam samipe ramunam rati pradam vitta pradam nityam imam vihaya akamadam dukkha bhayadishoka mohadam tucchamaham bhajegnya. And she says, I'm such a fool that I've given up the service, I've given up the engagement with that being who is eternally situated within my heart and is the most dear, Ramanam, most dear to me. That most dear Ishvara, the ultimate of this universe, the bestower of real love. And in my Bhakti Yoga teachings, I talk about how another word for love is Rati, the ultimate love. Rati Pradam is the bestower of real love and real happiness, Ananda, and the source of all inner prosperity, which leads to contentment. I have neglected Ishvara in my heart. And instead, I have from this delusion that outside me I will get fulfilled. I have been been serving through this ignorance, the tucham, insignificant males' bodies which will never satisfy, they are incapable of satisfying my deepest desires of fulfillment. And she says, who have brought me over these years nothing but shoka, unhappiness, bhaya, fear, anxiety and lamentation, and delusion. So she recognizes, what am I doing? And now I will not, due to management of time, I will just continue reading what she's saying instead of going into the Sanskrit. So then she goes on to say, oh, I have uselessly tortured my soul. I have sold myself away to lusty, greedy customers who are themselves objects of pity. And I just think how we sell ourselves cheap, short. And I write about that in my book, Roar Like a Goddess. For minor things, for people who ultimately give us grief and sorrow. For that minor fulfillment, we sell ourselves cheap. And so she's saying, I've sold my body so cheap to lusty, greedy men who were themselves objects of pity. Why? Because they were seeking her out for their fulfillment. What can a beggar give a beggar? What can a needy person give a needy person? So, yes, I was born in the family of a prostitute. And yes, I this is my source of income. It's my profession. But the fact that she became so miserable was because of her attachments, her aspirations, her passions to get whatever she can from that. How foolish had she become to expect romantic fulfillment, soul fulfillment, complete fulfillment from the sexual act, as we do. And then begins her teaching of the great teacher, Pingala. And then she goes on to say the material body. Now she has this, waking up from Deha Vasana or body Vasana, and which we have talked about in previous verses. And she says this material body, this body of mine is this material body that we all possess and sell in the marketplace is like a house in which I, the soul, am living. The bones forming my spine, ribs, arms, and legs are like the beams and cross beams and gillars of the house. And the whole structure, which is full of stool and urine, is covered by skin, hair, and nails. The 9 doors leading into this body are constantly excreting foul substances. And besides me, what other woman in this world could be so foolish as to devote herself and her whole existence completely based on this material body, thinking that she will find her desires fulfilled for pleasure and love and security through this contraption? This is what she says. And then she goes on to say, certainly in the city of Videha, I alone am completely foolish. It's like a waking up from her delusion. I neglected that ultimate reality who has awarded us everything, even our spiritual form. And instead, I desired just this transient gratification. Did I forget that that supreme self is everyone's well-wisher, situated in every heart? So now I pray to you. And so she prays to Ishvara as Krishna. And so she says, or as Vishnu, and she says, I pray to you. May I be surrendered. May my desires also be surrendered to you. And may I enjoy your constant company like your consort Lakshmi. So this is what she says. Because who is Lakshmi? Lakshmi represents abundance. So that's his consort. It's symbolic for who is attending to that ultimate power is abundance. And then she has a thought about the human objects, the living objects that we look to for satisfaction. And she says, well, for women, because she's a woman and she's thinking like a woman, she says, we look towards men. But why these men, even the men from higher lokas, they will also die. They will be dragged away by Kala, by time. Therefore, really, how much pleasure and happiness can I go to the bank for these men? So it's not that you cannot have fun, cannot have a fulfilling relationship, but how fulfilling and for how long? That's something to think about for every soul when they have to think of their own liberation. And then she says, although I was so stubbornly clinging to this world and to, through this body, enjoy the comforts of the material world. But then she says, but today somehow, by Ishvara's kripa grace, detachment or vairagyam has arisen in my heart. And now I'm feeling very peaceful, very happy. So it seems like Ishvara must be pleased with me by not sending me any customer. And without even knowing it, in some lifetime or this lifetime, I must have done something to be noticed by that supreme power. And that it came to me in the form of an adversity. She didn't have what she wanted. But in that moment, if vairagyam, if dispassion, detachment, and clingingness and seeing through it arises, you've got the biggest gift. And then she talks about the value of detachment. And she says, this teacher says to us, a person who has developed detachment, vairagyam, can give up the bondage of the mind and as a result, the bondage of society, the bondage of relationships, the bondage of so-called friendships, the bondage of human love. And this is deep. This is hard for an ordinary person. And if you are tuning in directly over Zoom with me in my Vedic study circle or finding this teaching on YouTube, this goes against everything you are told. But here we're looking at the deepest question of why is your soul in bondage? And it is these very relationships and their pursuit and the disappointment that comes from them and the hope that leads to hopelessness that brings about great suffering and squashes us and suffocates us in an unending loop of disappointment and desire. So she says that thanks to detachment, I can step back and separate from it. And then she recognizes the value of suffering and she says, due to my great suffering, such detachment has awoken in my heart. Yet, and then she says, yet how could I have undergone this merciful suffering? She sees suffering as grace. She sees suffering as a blessing. If I were actually unfortunate. Therefore, in fact, I am deeply fortunate, for I have received the mercy of Ishvara in the form of this suffering. I am so proud that I have pleased Ishvara. So look at her mind. She has flipped completely due to the beginning of detachment where one separates. Her mind is going from impure to pure. And now she is seeing the blessings of suffering rather than cursing it. And then the last few verses are, she says, with great bhakti, I accept the great benefit that Ishvara has bestowed upon me through this suffering, through not fulfilling my desires. As a result, I can now separate from them. At least she will not have the mental angst. She may still receive customers, because that is probably her mother was also a prostitute, her grandmother was also a prostitute. So prostitution is her swadharma at this point. But at least she will not be mentally in bondage. And she says, having given up these desires that put me in suffering, I now take shelter. Bhaj Govinda, in Govinda. And after a while, when she's having these thoughts, something strange happens and she becomes really blissed out, content, happy with her situations. There's a transformation that happens. And she says, I'm now completely satisfied. I have full faith in the justice of this divine, truth, the divine light. So then she comes up with this karma yoga conclusion that I will maintain myself as in the body with whatever comes of its own accord naturally. And then I shall enjoy my life with the knowledge that Ishvara is the real source of love and happiness. And this Ishvara, this knowledge of Ishvara was stolen away, she says, in her concluding verse, by my constant thinking and constant actions to gratify my desires. And I had fallen into the dark well of samsara kupa, of material existence. In a well, and when you're in a well, light doesn't reach you down there. So I'd fallen into this well. But, and in that well, I had been seized by the serpent of time. My body was aging. But who else could save a soul fallen in the well of samsara? It was Ishvara who came and gave me this detachment, this suffering, which led to detachment, and I am now separating. Thus, Pingala's mind moved from impure to pure. She was cut off from all desires of the crazy-making kind. She became situated in perfect peace. And in her final verse in Canto 11, Chapter 8, verse 44, she says, Asha hi paramam dukkham, nairashyam paramam sukham. What does it mean? That desire is the ultimate cause of sorrow, and freedom from such desire is the cause of happiness. So with this ends the story of Pingala. Hmm. In our next session, we shall continue and conclude verse 12, such an important verse to help us break through the delusion of desire fulfillment as a source of happiness. And we shall look at how to fulfill our desires in a normal way without polluting our mind, using knowledge. We will also explore verse 13, which is the last verse taught by Shankara. Well, at least the first set of 12 verses go from verse 2 to verse 12, 13. And we will look at verse 13, and we shall then conclude the first round of teachings of verses, because these are now going to be followed by verses penned by Shankaracharya's Param Shishyas, or the inner circle of students. And these students will, some of them give verses which are pretty original in the sense that we can stop and look at them more deeply. Otherwise, they are beautiful contemplations on what their teacher has provided, and they take our contemplation further. So we shall be moving along and covering 3 or more verses per session. With that, many blessings on cultivating a pure mind. May you welcome disappointments and sorrow and turn to knowledge so that you can experience the fruit, the blessings of detachment rising within your heart. Everything, including difficulties and obstacles, are by divine order, Ishvara's order. May you continue to remember Govinda, that ultimate reality, and tread to find that ultimate reality as your true identity within you. Take care, Jemu.